Welcome in, Mushi Mushi. Welcome back to Somnium and welcome to your Friday. My name is Mira Mushi, your Dream Siren from Somnium. Let's adjust our chat box really quick. We're doing a fun new scene today because I really personally enjoy having really cozy baths when I'm winding down from my week. So I thought it would be nice to have, how do you say, like a bath, a bath reading stream because I do enjoy reading in the bath. And so I thought that this would be a nice appeal to have as well. So we've got our little chat box there now out of the way. And we've got this nice relaxing scene. And yes, please take it all in. If you want to join me in your own bubble bath, please feel free to do so. I welcome that. And allow yourself to just do as I do, put on an audiobook and just lay back and listen and let my mind drift away and just relax. So I've been trying to get us caught up the last 2 days now, on some of the streams that we've missed due to my internet issues. So it looks like we're up and stable now. I haven't had any issues yesterday, and I didn't have, we had those couple of dropped instances with our frames on Wednesday. On Wednesday just seems to be a funky day. I don't know what it is, but that's okay. We're gonna see if we have to maybe switch off of a Wednesday, but I'm hoping not. I do like the schedule that I have outside of maybe adding one additional day, but I'm trying to figure if I want to do that on a Saturday or a Sunday. So we will see. But for today, we're going to be getting back into our reading from Andrew Lang in the Grey Fairy book. And we left off at an impossible enchantment. So let's give a little bit of time for everyone to allow themselves to get as comfortable as they can for a reading session, whether that's going to be in your bed or at your computer chair. Preferably somewhere not in your computer chair so you can be comfortable, unless you have one of those ultra cozy plushy chairs. Then I invite you to get your blanket and your stuffed animal, your warm beverage, and join us on our journey into reading today. Or if you want to be like me and have a soak in the bath, then allow your body to just relax with those Epsom salts and those bath bombs, whatever it is that helps to take you to your ultimate relaxation. So let's get ready to get into everything. And we will have our breaks. So around an hour, we'll take our break and just readjust, go get another drink or whatever you need. And then we'll get right back into it. So, and all of our readings can be found down in the playlist. It's titled Mira's Reading Corner. So please be sure to check out the playlist. And also let me go ahead and plug our website in again as well, just to allow people to become familiar with some of our lore. Our channel commands are here as well on the front page. And just ways for my dreamers to get to know me a little bit better and allow themselves to become more involved in Somnium and what your Dream Siren does. Let me check one more thing and then we'll get right into it. Okay. That's good. And and hopefully our audio is doing well. I haven't heard any peaking, so we're gonna we're gonna hope that all is well. All is well with our audio. All right. So an impossible enchantment. Please enjoy your respite, and thank you for being here with me. There once lived a king who was much loved by his people, and he too loved them warmly. Oh wait, did we read this one already? Oh, I think we did. Oh, we did. Let's go forward. Oh yes, we did read this one. With Grisalia. I think I went back to read that one because I really liked it. Yeah. Okay. Okay, so today we'll go and start off with Janny and the Draken. I also discovered today that the author wrote this book with his wife, Lenora. So I thought that was really cute that they wrote a child bedtime story book together. I feel a sneeze coming. Okay, I think we're in the clear. All right, Janny and the Draken in the Grey Fairy book. Once there was a man who shunned the world and lived in the wilderness. He owned nothing but a flock of sheep, whose milk and wool he sold, and so procured himself bread to eat. He also carried wooden spoons and sold them. He had a wife and one little girl, and after a long time, his wife had another child. The evening it was born, the man went to the nearest village to fetch a nurse, and on the way he met a monk who begged him for a night's lodging. This the man willingly granted, and took him home with him. There being no one far nor near to baptize the child, the man asked the monk to do him this service, and the child was given the name Johnny. In the course of time, Janny's parents died, and he and his sister were left alone in the world. Soon affairs went badly with them, so they determined to wander away to seek their fortune. In packing up, the sister found a knife which the monk had left for his godson, and this she gave to her brother. Then they went on their way, taking with them the 3 sheep which were all that remained of their flocks. After wandering for 3 days, they met a man with 3 dogs who proposed that they should exchange animals, he taking the sheep and they the dogs. The brother and sister were quite pleased at the arrangement, and after the exchange they separated and went their different ways. Janny and his sister, in course of time, came to a great castle, in which dwelt 40 Draken, who, when they heard that Janny had come, fled 40 fathoms underground. So Janny found the castle deserted, and abode there with his sister, and every day went out to hunt with the weapons the Draken had left in the castle. One day, when he was away hunting, one of the Draken came up to get the provisions, not knowing that there was anyone in the castle. When he saw Janny's sister, he was terrified, but she told him not to be afraid, and by they fell in love with each other, for every time that Janny went to hunt, the sister called the Dracos up. Thus they went on making love to each other till at length unknown to Jenny, they got married. Then, when it was too late, the sister repented and was afraid of Jenny's wrath when he found it out. One day, the Dracos came to her and said, "You must pretend to be ill, and when Jenny asks what ails you and what you want, you must answer, 'Cherries.' And when he inquires where these are to be found, you must say, 'There are some in a garden a day's journey from here.' Then your brother will go there and will never come back, for there dwells 3 of my brothers who will look after him well." Then the sister did as the Dracos advised, and next day Jenny set out to fetch the cherries, taking his 3 dogs with him. When he came to the garden where the cherries grew, he jumped off his horse, drank some water from the spring, which rose there, and fell directly into a deep sleep. The Draken came round about to eat him, but the dogs flung themselves on them and tore them into pieces, and scratched at grave into the grounds with their paws, and buried the Draken so that Jenny might not see their dead bodies. When Jenny awoke and saw his dogs all covered with blood, he believed that they had caught somewhere a wild beast, and was angry because they had left none of it for him. But he plucked the cherries and took them back to his sister. When the Dracos heard that Jenny had come back, he fled for fear 40 fathoms underground, and the sister ate the cherries and declared herself well again. The next day, when Jenny was gone to hunt, the Dracos came out and advised the sister that she should pretend to be ill again. And when her brother asked her what she would like, she should answer, "Quinces." And when he inquired where these were to be found, she should say, "In a garden distant about 2 days' journey." Then would Jenny certainly be destroyed, for there dwelt 6 brothers of the Dracos, each of whom had 2 heads. The sister did as she was advised, and the next day Jenny again set off, taking his 3 dogs with him. When he came to the garden, he dismounted, sat down to rest a little, and fell fast asleep. First, there came 3 Draken round about to eat him, and when these 3 had been worried by the dogs, there came 3 others who were worried in like manner. Then the dog again dug a grave and buried the dead Draken, that their master might not see them. When Jenny awoke and beheld the dogs all covered with blood, he thought, as before, that they had killed a wild beast, and was again angry with them for leaving him nothing. But he took the quinces and brought them back to his sister, who, when she had eaten them, declared herself better. The Dracos, when he had heard that Jenny had come back, fled for fear 40 fathoms deeper underground. Next day, when Jenny was hunting, the Dracos went to the sister and advised that she should again pretend to be ill, and should beg for some pears, which grew in a garden 3 days' journey from the castle. From this quest, Jenny would certainly never return, for there dwelt 9 brothers of the Dracos, each of whom had 3 heads. The sister did as she was told, and next day Jenny, taking his 3 dogs with him, went to get the pears. When he came to the garden, he laid himself down to rest, and soon fell asleep. Then first came 3 Draken to eat him, and when the dogs had worried these, 6 others came and fought the dogs a long time. The noise of this combat awoke Jenny, and he slew the Draken, and knew at last why the dogs were covered with blood. After that, he freed all whom the Draken held prisoners, among others, a king's daughter. Out of gratitude, she would have taken him for her husband, but he put her off, saying, "For the kindness that I have been able to do to you, you shall receive in this castle all the blind and lame who pass this way." The princess promised him to do so, and on his departure gave him a ring. So Jenny plucked the pears and took them to his sister, who, when she had eaten them, declared she felt better. When, however, the Dracos heard that Jenny had come back yet a third time safe and sound, he fled for fright 40 fathoms deeper underground. And next day, when Jenny was away hunting, he crept out and said to the sister, "Now we are indeed both lost, unless you find out from him wherein his strength lies, and then between us, we will contrive to do away with him." When, therefore, Jenny had come back from hunting, and sat at evening with his sister by the fire, she begged him to tell her wherein lay his strength, and he answered, "It lies in my 2 fingers. If these are bound together, then all my strength disappears." "That I will not believe," said the sister, "unless I see it for myself." Then he let her tie his fingers together with a thread, and immediately he became powerless. Then the sister called up the Dracos, who, when he had come forth, tore out Jenny's eyes, gave them to his dogs to eat, and threw him into a dry well. Now it happened that some travelers, going to draw water from this well, heard Jenny growing at the bottom. They came near and asked him where he was, and he begged them to draw him up from the well, for he was a poor, unfortunate man. The travelers let a rope down and drew him up to daylight. It was not till then that he first became aware that he was blind, and he begged the travelers to lead him to the country of the king whose daughter he had freed, and they would be well repaid for their trouble. When they had brought him there, he sent to beg the princess to come to him, but she did not recognize him until he had shown her the ring that she had given him. Then she remembered him and took him with her into the castle. When she learnt what had befallen him, she called together all the sorceresses in the country in order that they should tell her where the eyes were. At last, she found one who declared that she knew where they were, and that she could restore them. This sorceress then went straight to the castle where dwelt the sister and the Dracos, and gave something to the dogs to eat, which caused the eyes to reappear. She took them with her and put them back in Jenny's head, so that he saw as well as before. Then he returned to the castle of the Dracos, whom he slew as well as his sister, and taking his dogs with him, went back to the princess, and they were immediately married. The end. Well, what does that mean, dear? And welcome. You'll have to tell me so I can properly translate it. It means hi. Oh. Well, hello, Mushi Mushi. Welcome in. I'll have to add that into the prompts. Hold on. My sweet little listeners, give me just a moment. it has been added. Let's try it and make sure that it works. Yay! Oh, thank you. You'll have to tell me later how to pronounce it. Alright, now let's move to our next story, which is the partnership of the thief and the liar. Ooh, this one should be very interesting. Shamelessly copy pasting me. I trusted you. I did. I'm sorry. I did. It's cute. All right. There was once upon a time a thief who, being out of a job, was wondering. Wait a minute. Isn't a thief's job to be a thief? All right. There was once a thief. There was once upon a time a thief who, being out of a job, was wandering by himself up and down the seashore. As he walked, he passed a man who was standing still, looking at the waves. "I wonder," said the thief, addressing the stranger, "if you have ever seen a stone swimming." "Most certainly I have," replied the other man, "and, what is more, I saw the same stone jump out of the water and fly through the air." "That is capital," replied the thief. "You and I must go into partnership. We shall certainly make our fortunes. Let us start together from the palace of the king of the neighboring country. When we get there, I will go into his presence alone and will tell him the most startling thing I can invent. Then you must follow and back up my lie. Having agreed to do this, they set out on their travels. After several days' journeying, they reached the town where the king's palace was, and here they parted for a few hours, while the thief sought an interview with the king and begged his majesty to give him a glass of beer. "That is impossible," said the king, "as this year there has been a failure of all the crops, and the hops and the vines, so we have neither wine nor beer in the whole kingdom." "How extraordinary," answered the thief. "I have just come from a country where the crops were so fine that I saw 12 barrels of beer made out of one branch of hops. I bet you 300 florin that that is not true," answered the king. "And I bet you 300 florins it is true," replied the thief. Then each stalked his 300 florin, and the king said he would decide the answer by sending a servant into that country to see if it was true. So the servant set out on horseback, and on the way he met a man, and he asked him whence he came. And the man told him that he came from the same country to which the servant was at the moment bound. "If that is the case," said the servant, "you can tell me how high the hops grow in your country, and how many barrels of beer can be brewed from one branch." "I can't tell you that," answered the man, "but I happened to be present when the hops were being gathered in, and I saw that it took 3 men with axes 3 days to cut down one branch." Then the servant thought that he might save himself a long journey, so he gave the man 10 florin, and told him he must repeat to the king what he had just told him. And when they got back to the palace, they came together into the king's presence. And the king asked him, "Well, is it true about the hops?" "Yes, sire, it is," answered the servant. "And here is a man I have brought with me from the country to confirm the tale." So the king paid the thief the 300 florins, and the partner once more set out together in search of adventures. As they journeyed, the thief said to his comrade, "I will now go to another king, and will tell him something still more startling, and you must follow and back up my lie, and we shall get some money out of him. Just see if we don't." When they reached the next kingdom, the thief presented himself to the king and requested him to give him a cauliflower, and the king answered, "Owing to a blight among the vegetables, we have no cauliflower." "That's strange," answered the thief. "I have just come from a country where it grows so well that one head of cauliflower filled 12 water tubs." "I don't believe it," answered the king. "I bet you 600 florins it is true," replied the thief. "And I bet you 600 florins it is not true," answered the king. And he sent for a servant and ordered him to start at once for the country whence the thief had come, to find out if his story of the cauliflower was true. On his journey, the servant met a man. Stopping his horse, he asked him where he came from, and the man replied that he had come from the country to whence the other was traveling. "If that is true," said the servant, "you can tell me what size the cauliflower grows in your country. Is it so large that one head fills 12 water tubs?" "I have not seen that," answered the man, "but I saw 12 wagons drawn by 12 horses, carrying one head of cauliflower to the market." And the servant answered, "Here are 10 florin for you, my man, for you have saved me a long journey. Come with me now, and tell the king what you have just told me." "All right," said the man, and they went together to the palace. And when the king asked the servant if he had found out the truth about the cauliflower, the servant replied, "Sire, all that you have heard was perfectly true. Here is a man from the country who will tell you so." So the king had to pay the thief the 600 florins, and the two partners set out once more on their travels with their 900 florins. When they reached the country of their neighboring king, the thief entered the royal presence and began conversation by asking if his majesty knew that any adjacent kingdom there was a town with a church steeple on which a bird had alighted, and that the steeple was so high and the bird's beak so long that it was pecking the stars till some of them fell out of the sky. "I don't believe it," said the king. "Nevertheless, I am prepared to bet 1,200 florins that it is true," answered the thief. "And I bet 1,200 florins that it is a lie," replied the king. And he straightway sent a servant into the neighboring country to find out the truth. As he rode, the servant met a man coming in the opposite direction. So he hailed him and asked him where he came from. And the man replied that he came out of the very town to which the man was bound. Then the servant asked him if the story they had heard about the bird with the long beak was true. "I don't know about that," answered the man, "as I have never seen the bird. But I once saw 12 men shoving all their might and main with a broom to push a monster egg into a cellar." "That is capital," answered the servant, presenting the man with 10 florins. I can't. I'm trying so hard to not laugh when they say that is capital, because all I can think of is when we say that's cap. Now, mind you, this book is from like the 1800s. So back then it was this, that is capital. And now here we are in the 21st century saying that that's cap instead. All right, I'm sorry. Papa Captain is not the same cap. Oh man, this is so silly. I'm saying that from now on. I'm no longer saying that's cap. If I think somebody's lying, I'm going to say that is capital. Oh, man. That's what I love reading. Oh, that is capital. Oh, man. Pin it in the books. That is positively capital, kind sire, if I do say so myself. Oh, my cheeks. All right, I'm sorry. I don't mean to ruin the cozy reading vibe. I just think that's so funny. Oh, God. That is capital. All right, hold on. That is capital. I literally have tears in my eyes. Answered the servant, presenting the man with 10 florins. Come and tell your tale to the king, and you will save me a long journey. So, when the story was repeated to the king, there was nothing for him to do but to pay the thief the 1,200 florins. Then the two partners set out again with their ill-gotten gains, which they proceeded to divide into 2 equal shares. But the thief kept back 3 of the florins that belonged to the liar's half of the booty. Shortly afterwards, they each married and settled down in homes of their own with their wives. One day, the liar discovered that he had been down out of 3 florins by his partner, so he went to his house and demanded them from him for 3 florins. Come next Saturday, and I will give them to you, answered the thief. But as he had no intention of giving the liar the money, when Saturday morning came, he stretched himself out stiff and stark upon the bed, and told his wife she was to say he was dead. Oh. So the wife rubbed her eyes with an onion. Oh, man. And when the liar appeared at the door, she met him in tears and told him that her husband was dead. He could not come to be paid the 3 florins. But the liar, who knew his partner's tricks, instantly suspected the truth and said, as he has not paid me, I will pay him out with 3 good lashes of my riding whip. At these words, the thief sprang to his feet and, appearing at the door, promised his partner that if he would return the following Saturday, he would pay him. So the liar went away with the promise. Oh, man. But when Saturday morning came, the thief got up early and hid himself under a truss of hay in the hayloft. When the liar appeared to demand his 3 florins, the wife met him with tears in her eyes and told him that her husband was dead. Where have you buried him? Asked the liar. In the hayloft, answered the wife. Then I will go there and take away some hay in payment of his debt, said the liar. And proceeding to the hayloft, he began to toss about the hay with a pitchfork, prodding it into the trusses of the hay, till in terror of his life, the thief crept out and promised his partner to pay him the 3 florins on the following Saturday. Oh my God. All this for 3 florins. Come on, my guy. Oh, man. When the day came, he got up at sunrise, and going down into the crypt of the neighboring chapel, stretched himself out quite still and stiff in an old stone coffin. But the liar, who was quite as clever as his partner, very soon bethought him of the crypt, and set out for the chapel, confident that he would shortly discover the hiding place of his friend. So he had just entered the crypt and his partner's eyes were not yet accustomed to the darkness when he heard the sound of whispering at the grated windows. Listening intently, he overheard the plotting of a band of robbers who had brought their treasures to the crypt, meaning to hide it there while they set out on the fresh adventures. All the time they were speaking, they were removing the bars from the window, and in another minute, they would all have entered the crypt and discovered the liar. Quick as thought, he wound his mantle round him and placed himself, standing stiff and erect, in a niche in the wall, so that in the dim light, he looked just like an old stone statue. Excuse me. As soon as the robbers entered the crypt, they set about to work of dividing their treasure. Now, there were 12 robbers, but by mistake, the chief of the band divided the gold into 13 heaps. When he saw his mistake, he said that they had not time to count it all over again, but that the 13th heap should belong to whoever among them could strike off the head of the old stone statue in the niche with one stroke. With these words, he took up an axe and approached the niche where the liar was standing. But just as he had waxed the axe over his head ready to strike, a voice was heard from the stone coffin saying, in a sepulchral tone, "Clear out of this, or the dead will arise from their coffins, and the statues will descend from the walls, and you will be driven out more dead than alive." And with a bound, the thief jumped out of his coffin, and the liar from his niche, and the robbers were so terrified that they ran helter-skelter out of the crypt, leaving all the gold behind them, and vowing that they would never put foot inside of the haunted place again. So the partners divided the gold between them and carried it to their homes, and history tells us no more about them. The end. That one was very cute. Dead or alive reference in the 18th century book. You spin me right around and Look, history is just always repeating itself. As they say, there's nothing new under the sun. Oh, man. That one was actually really funny. Let's see. What time is it? Okay. I think we have time for one more before a break. Fortunatus and his purse. I gotta stop laughing. That is capital. Oh my god. I love it. Once upon a time, there lived in the city of Famagusta, in the island of Cyprus, a rich man called Theodorus. He ought to have been the happiest man in the whole world, as he had all he could wish for, and a wife and a little son whom loved him dearly. But unluckily, after a short time, he always grew tired of everything and had to seek new pleasures. Excuse me. When people are made like this, the end is generally the same. And before Fortunatus, for that was the boy's name, was 10 years old, his father had spent all his money and had not a farthing left. But though Theodorus had been so foolish, he was not quite without sense, and set about getting work at once. His wife, too, instead of reproaching him, sent away the servants and sold their fine horses, and did all the work of the house herself, even washing the clothes of her husband and child. Thus time passed till Fortunatus was 16. One day, when they were sitting at supper, the boy said to Theodorus, "Father, why do you look so sad? Tell me what is wrong, and perhaps I can help you." "Ah, my son, I have reason enough to be sad. But for me, you would now have been enjoying every kind of pleasure, instead of being buried in this tiny house." "Oh, do not let that trouble you," replied Fortunatus. "It is time I made some money for myself. To be sure, I have never been taught any trade. Still, there must be something I can do. I will go and walk on the seashore and think about it." Very soon, sooner than he expected, a chance came, and Fortunatus, like a wise boy, seized it at once. The post offered him was that of a page to the Earl of Flanders, and as the Earl's daughter was just going to be married, splendid festivities were held in her honor, and at some of the tithing matches, Fortunatus was lucky enough to win the prize. These prizes, together with presents from the lords and the ladies of the court, who liked him for his pleasant ways, made Fortunatus feel quite a rich man. But though his head was not turned by the notice taken of him, it excited the envy of some of the other pages about the court, and one of them, called Robert, invited a plot to move Fortunatus out of his way. So he told the young man that the Earl had taken a dislike to him and meant to kill him. Fortunatus believed the story, and packing up his fine clothes and money, slipped away before dawn. He went to a great many big towns and lived well, and as he was generous and not wiser than most youth of his age, he very soon found himself penniless. Like his father, he then began to think of work, and tramped half over Brittany in search of it. Nobody seemed to want him, and he wandered about from one place to another, till he found himself in a dense wood, without any path and not much light. Here he spent 2 whole days, with nothing to eat and very little water to drink, going first in one direction and then in another, but never being able to find his way out. During the first night, he slept soundly, and was too tired to fear either man or beast, and when darkness came on for the second time, and growls were heard in the distance, he grew frightened, and looked about for a high tree out of reach of his enemies. Hardly had he settled himself comfortably in one of the forked branches, when a lion walked up to a spring that burst from a rock close to the tree, and crouching down drank greedily. This was bad enough, but after all, lions do not climb trees, and as long as Fortunatus stayed up on his perch, he was quite safe. But no sooner was the lion out of sight than his place was taken by a bear, and bears, as Fortunatus knew very well, are tree climbers. His heart beat fast, and not without reason, for as the bear turned away, he looked up and saw Fortunatus. Now, in those days, every young man carried a sword slung to his belt, and it was a fashion that came in very handy for Fortunatus. He drew his sword, and when the bear got within a yard of him, he made a fierce lunge forward. The bear, wild with pain, tried to spring, but the bow he was standing on broke with his weight, and he fell heavily to the ground. Then Fortunatus descended from the tree, first taking good care to see no other wild animals were in sight, and killed him with a single blow. He was just thinking he would light a fire and make a hearty dinner of bear's flesh, which is not all that bad eating, when he beheld a beautiful lady standing by his side leaning on a wheel, and her eyes hidden by a bandage. "I am Dawn Fortune," she said, "and I have a gift for you. Shall it be wisdom, strength, long life, riches, health, or beauty? Think well and tell me what you will have." But Fortunatus, who had proven the truth of the proverb that it's ill thinking on an empty stomach, answered quickly, "Good lady, let me have riches and such plenty that I may never again be as hungry as I am now." And the lady held out a purse and told him he had only to put his hand into it, and he and his children would always find 10 pieces of gold. But when they were dead, it would be a magic purse no longer. At this news, Fortunatus was beside himself with joy and could hardly find words to thank the lady. But she told him that the best thing he could do was to find his way out of the woods, and before bidding him farewell, pointed which path he should take. He walked along it as fast as his weakness could let him, until a welcome light at a little distance showed him that a house was near. It turned out to be an inn, but before entering, Fortunatus thought he had better make sure of the truth of what the lady had told him, and took out the purse and looked inside. Sure enough, there were the 10 pieces of gold, shining brightly. Then Fortunatus walked boldly up to the inn and ordered them to get ready a good supper at once, as he was very hungry, and to bring him the best wine in the house. And he seemed to care so little what he spent that everybody thought he was a great lord, and vied with each other who should run quickest when he called. After a night passed in a soft bed, Fortunatus felt so much better that he asked the landlord if he could find him some men servants and tell him where any good horses were to be got. The next thing was to provide him with smart clothes, and then to take a big house where he could get great feasts to the nobles and beautiful ladies who lived in palaces round about. In this manner, a whole year soon slipped away, and Fortunatus was so busy amusing himself that he never once remembered his parents whom he had left behind in Cyprus. But though he was thoughtless, he was not bad-hearted. As soon as their existence crossed his mind, he set about making preparations to visit them. And as he was not fond of being alone, he looked round for someone older and wiser than himself to travel with him. It was not long before he had the good luck to come across the old man who had left his wife and children in a far country many years before, when he went out into the world to seek the fortune which he never had found. He agreed to accompany Fortunatus back to Cyprus, but only on condition he should first be allowed to return for a few weeks to his own home, before venturing to set sail for an island so strange and distant. Fortunatus agreed to his proposal, and as he was always fond of anything new, said that he would go with him. The journey was long, and they had to cross many large rivers, and climb over high mountains, and find their way through thick woods. But before they reached at length the old man's castle, his wife and children had almost given up hopes of seeing him again, and crowded eagerly round him. Indeed, it did not take Fortunatus 5 minutes to fall in love with the youngest daughter, the most beautiful creature in the whole world, whose name was Cassandra. "Give her to me for my wife," he said to the old man, "and let us all go together to Famagosta." So a ship was bought big enough to hold Fortunatus, the old man, and his wife, and their 10 children, 5 of them sons and 5 daughters. And the day before they sailed, the wedding was celebrated with magnificent rejoicing, and everybody thought that Fortunatus must certainly be a prince in disguise. But when they reached Cyprus, he learned to his sorrow that both his father and mother were dead, and for some time he shut himself up in his house and would see nobody, full of shame at having forgotten them all these years. Then he begged that the old man and his wife would remain with him and take the place of his parents. For 12 years, Fortunatus and Cassandra and their 2 little boys lived happily in Famagosta. They had a beautiful house and everything that they could possibly want, and when Cassandra's sister married, the purse provided them each with a fortune. But at last Fortunatus grew tired of staying at home and thought he should like to go out and see the world again. Cassandra shed many tears at first when he told her of his wishes, and he had a great deal of trouble to persuade her to give her consent. But on his promising to return at the end of 2 years, she agreed to let him go. Excuse me. Before he went away, he showed her 3 chests of gold, which stood in a room with an iron door and walls 12 feet thick. If anything should happen to me, he said, and I should never come back, keep one of the chests for yourself and give the others to our 2 sons. Then he embraced them all and took ship for Alexandria. The wind was fair, and in a few days they entered the harbor, where Fortunatus was informed by a man who he met on landing that if he wished to be well received in the town, he must begin by making a handsome present to the Sultan. "This is easily done," said Fortunatus, and went into a goldsmith's shop, where he bought a large gold cup, which cost 5,000 pounds. This gift so pleased the Sultan that he ordered 100 casks of spices to be given to Fortunatus. Fortunatus put them on board his ship and commanded the captain to return to Cyprus and deliver them to his wife Cassandra. Cyprus. Sorry. He next obtained an audience of the Sultan and begged permission to travel through the country, which the Sultan readily gave him, adding some letters to the rulers of other lands which Fortunatus might wish to visit. Filled with delight at feeling himself free to roam through the world once more, Fortunatus set out on his journey without losing a day. From court to court he went, astonishing everyone by the magnificence of his dress and splendor of his presence. At length, he grew as tired of wandering as he had been of staying at home, and returned to Alexandria, where he found the same ship that had brought him from Cyprus lying in the harbor. Of course, the first thing he did was to pay his respects to the Sultan, who was eager to hear about his adventures. When Fortunatus had told them all, the Sultan observed, "Well, you have seen many wonderful things, but I have something to show you more wonderful still." And he led him into a room where precious stones lay heaped against the wall. Fortunatus's eyes were quite dazzled, but the Sultan went on without pausing and opened a door at the farther end. As far as Fortunatus could see, the cupboard was quite bare, except for a little red cap, such as soldiers wear in Turkey. "Look at this," said the Sultan. "But there is nothing very valuable about it," answered Fortunatus. "I've seen a dozen better caps than that, this very day." "Ah," said the Sultan, "you do not know what you are talking about. Whoever puts this cap on his head and wishes himself in any place will find himself there in a moment. But who made it? Asked Fortunatus. That I cannot tell you, replied the Sultan. It is very heavy to wear? Asked Fortunatus. No, quite light, replied the Sultan. Just fill it. Fortunatus took the cap and put it on his head, and then, without thinking, wished himself back in the ship that was starting for Famagusta. In a second, he was standing at the prow, while the anchor was being weighed, and while the Sultan was repenting of his folly and allowing Fortunatus to try on the cap, the vessel was making fast for Cyprus. When it arrived, Fortunatus found his wife and children well, but the two old people were dead and buried. His sons had grown tall and strong, but unlike their father, had no wish to see the world, and found their chief pleasure in hunting and tiding. In the main, Fortunatus was content to stay quietly at home, and if a restless fit did seize upon him, he was able to go away a few hours without being missed, thanks to the cap, which he never sent back to the Sultan. By and by he grew old, and feeling that he had not many days to live, he sent for his two sons, and showing them the purse and the cap, he said to them, Never part with these precious possessions. They are worth more than all the gold and lands I leave behind me. But never tell their secret, even to your wife or dearest friend. That purse has served me well for 40 years, and no one knows whence I got my riches. Then he died and was buried by his wife Cassandra, and he was mourned in Famagusta for many years. The end. That one was really sweet. I really like that one. All right, next is the goat-faced girl. But first, let's take a quick break since we read past our break point. So we will be back very, very shortly, and then we will continue. Mm-hmm. I got some fresh tea, which will be too hot to drink right now. All right, we left off with the goat-faced girl. So let's see where this story takes us. There was once upon a time there was once upon a time called a peasant called Masaniello, who had 12 daughters. They were exactly like the steps of a staircase, for there was just a year between each sister. It was all the poor man could do to bring up such a large family, and in order to provide food for them, he used to dig in the fields all day long. In spite of his hard work, he only just succeeded in keeping the wolf from the door, and the poor little girls often went hungry to bed. Once a day, when Masaniello was working at the front of a high mountain, he came upon the mouth of a cave which was so dark and gloomy that even the sun seemed afraid to enter it. Suddenly, a huge green lizard appeared from the inside and stood before Masaniello, who nearly went out of his mind with terror, for the beast was as big as a crocodile and quite as fierce-looking. But the lizard sat down beside him in the most friendly manner and said, "Don't be afraid, my good man. I am not going to hurt you. On the contrary, I am most anxious to help you." When the peasant heard these words, he knelt before the lizard and said, "Dear lady, for I know not what to call you, I am in your power, but I beg of you to be merciful, for I have 12 wretched little daughters at home who are dependent upon me." "That's the very reason why I have come to you," replied the lizard. "Bring me your youngest daughter tomorrow morning. I promise to bring her up as if she was my own child, and to look upon her as the apple of my eye." When Masaniello heard her words, he was very unhappy, because he felt sure, from the lizard's wanting one of his daughters, the youngest and tenderest too, that the poor little girl would only serve as a dessert for the terrible creature's supper. At the same time, he said to himself, "If I refuse her request, she will certainly eat me on the spot. If I give her what she asks, she does indeed take part of myself, but if I refuse, she will take the whole of me. What am I to do? And how in the world am I to get out of the difficulty?" As he kept muttering to himself, the lizard said, "Make up your mind to do as I tell you at once. I desire to have your youngest daughter, and if you won't comply with my wish, I can only say it will be the worst for you." Seeing that there was nothing else to do, Masaniello I'm going to keep pronouncing that improperly until I can get it down. Masaniello set off for his home and arrived there looking so white and wretched that his wife asked him at once, "What has happened to you, my dear husband? Have you quarreled with anyone? Or has the poor donkey fallen down?" "Neither the one nor the other," answered the husband, "but something far worse than either. A terrible lizard has nearly frightened me out of my senses, for she threatened that if I did not give her our youngest daughter, she would make me repent it. My head is going round like a mill wind, and I do not know what to do. I am indeed between the devil and the deep sea. You know how dearly I love Ronzalo, and yet, if I fail to bring her to the lizard tomorrow morning, I must say farewell to life. Do advise me what to do." When his wife had heard all he had to say, she said to him, "How do you know, my dear husband, that the lizard is really our enemy? May she not be a friend in disguise? And your meeting with her may be the beginning of better things and the end of all of our misery. Therefore, go and take the child to her, for my heart tells me that you will never repent doing so." Masaniello was much comforted by her words, and next morning, as soon as it was light, took his little daughter by the hand and led her to the cave. The lizard, who was awaiting the peasant's arrival, came forward to meet him, and taking the little girl by the hand, she gave the father a sack of gold and said, "Go and marry your other daughters, and give them dowries with this gold, and be of good cheer, for Ronzalia will have both father and mother in me. It is a great piece of luck for her that she has fallen into my hands." Masaniello, quite overcome with gratitude, thanked the lizard and returned home to his wife. As soon as it was known how rich the peasant had become, suitors for the hands of his daughters were not wanting, and very soon he married them all off. And even then, there was enough gold left to keep himself and his wife in comfort and plenty all their days. As soon as the lizard was left alone with Ronzala, she changed the cave into a beautiful palace and led the girl inside. Here she brought her up like a little princess, and the child wanted for nothing. She gave her sumptuous food to eat, beautiful clothes to wear, and 1,000 servants to wait on her. Now, it happened one day that the king of the country was hunting in a wood close to the palace, and was overtaken by the dark. Seeing a light shining in the palace, he sent one of his servants to ask if he could get a night's lodging there. When the page knocked at the door, the lizard changed herself into a beautiful woman and opened it herself. When she heard the king's request, she sent a message to say that she would be delighted to see him, and gave him all he wanted. The king, on hearing this kind invitation, instantly betook himself to the palace, where he was received in the most hospitable manner. 100 pages with torches came to meet him, and 100 more waited on him at table, and another 100 waved big fans in the air to keep the flies from him. Ronzala herself poured out the wine for him, and so gracefully did she do it that His Majesty could not take his eyes off her. When the meal was finished and the table cleared, the king retired to sleep, and Ronzala drew the shoes from his feet, at the same time drawing his heart from his breast. So desperately had he fallen in love with her that he called the fairy to him and asked her for Ronzala's hand in marriage. As the kind fairy had only the girl's welfare at heart, she willingly gave her consent, and not her consent only, but a wedding portion of 7,000 golden guineas. The king, full of delight over his good fortune, prepared to take his departure, accompanied by Ronzala, who never so much as thanked the fairy for all she had done for her. When the fairy saw a base want of gratitude, she guaranteed to punish the girl, and, cursing her, she turned her face into a goat's head. In a moment, Ronzala's pretty mouth stretched out into a snout, and a beard, oh no, with a beard a yard long at the end of it, her cheeks sunken, and her shining plaits of hair changed into 2 sharp horns. When the king turned round and saw her, he thought he must have taken leave of his senses. He burst into tears and cried out, "Where is the hair that bound me so tightly? Where are the eyes that pierced through my heart? And where are the lips I kissed? Am I to be tied to a goat all of my life? No, nothing will induce me to become the laughingstock of my subjects for the sake of a goat-faced girl." When they reached his own country, he shut Ronzala up in a little turret chamber of his palace with a waiting maid and gave each of them 10 bundles of flax to spin, telling them that their task must be finished by the end of the week. The maid, obedient to the king's commands, set at once to work and combed out the flax, wound it round the spindles, and sat spinning at the wheel so diligently that her work was quite done by Saturday evening. But when Zola, who had been spoiled and petted in the fairy's house, and was quite unaware of the change that had taken place in her appearance, threw the flax out of the window and said, "What is the king thinking that he should give me this work to do? If he wants shirts, he can buy them. It isn't even as if he had picked me out of the gutter, for he ought to remember that I bought him 7,000 golden guineas as my wedding portion, and that I am his wife and not his slave. He must be mad to treat me like this." All the same, when Saturday evening came, and she saw that the waiting maid had finished her task, she took fright lest she should be punished for her idleness. So she hurried off of the palace of the fairy and confided all her woes to her. The fairy embraced her tenderly and gave her a sack of full spun flax in order that she might show it to the king and let him see what a good worker she was. Renzola took the sack without one word of thanks and returned to the palace, leaving the kind fairy very indignant over her want of gratitude. When the king saw the flax all spun, he gave Renzola the waiting maid each a little dog and told them to look after the animals and train them carefully. The waiting maid brought hers up to the greatest possible care, and treated it almost as if it was her son. But Renzola said, "I do not know what to think. Have I come among a lot of lunatics? Does the king imagine that I am going to comb and feed a dog with my own hands?" With these words, she opened the window and threw the poor little beast out, and he fell on the ground as dead as a stone. When a few months had passed, the king sent a message to say that he would like to see how the dogs were getting on. Renzola, who felt very uncomfortable in her mind at the request, hurried off once more to the fairy. This time, she found an old man at the door of the fairy's palace, who said to her, "Who are you, and what do you want?" When Renzola heard his question, she answered angrily, "Don't you know me, old goat beard, and how dare you address me in such a way?" "The pot can't call the kettle black," answered the old man, "for it is not I, but you who have the goat's head." Just wait a moment, you ungrateful wretch, and I will show you what a pass your want of gratitude has brought you. With these words, he hurried away and returned with the mirror, which he held up before Renzola. At the sight of her ugly, hairy face, the girl nearly fainted with horror, and she broke into loud sobs at seeing her countenance so changed. Then the old man said, "You must remember, Renzola, that you are a peasant's daughter, and that the fairy turned you into a queen. But you were ungrateful, and never as much as thanked her for all that she had done for you. Therefore, she has determined to punish you. But if you wish to lose your long white beard, throw yourself at the fairy's feet and implore her to forgive you. She has a tender heart and will perhaps take pity on you." Renzola, who was really sorry for her conduct, took the old man's advice, and the fairy not only gave her back her former face, but she dressed her in gold-embroidered dress, presented her with a beautiful carriage, and brought her back, accompanied by a host of servants, to her husband. When the king saw her looking as beautiful as ever, he fell in love with her once more and bitterly repented having caused her so much suffering. So, Renzola lived happily ever afterwards, for she loved her husband and honored the fairy, and was grateful to the old man for having told her the truth. From the Italian. The end. Oh, that one was cute too. Next, what came of picking flowers? There was once a woman who had 3 daughters whom she loved very much. One day, the eldest was walking in a water meadow when she saw a pink growing in the stream. She stooped to pick the flower, but her hand had scarcely touched it when she vanished altogether. The next morning, the second sister went out into the meadow to see if she could find any traces of the lost girl, and as a branch of lovely roses lay trailing across her path, she bent down to move it, and in doing so, could not resist plucking one of the roses. In a moment, she too had disappeared. Wondering what could have become of her 2 sisters, the youngest followed in their footsteps and fell a victim to a branch of delicious white jasmine. So the old woman was left without any daughter at all. She wept and wept and wept all day and all night, and went on weeping so long that her son, who had been a little boy when his sisters disappeared, grew up to be a tall youth. And then one night, he asked his mother to tell him what was the matter. When he had heard the whole story, he said, "Give me your blessing, mother, and I will go and search the world till I find them." So he set forth, and after he had traveled several miles without any adventures, he came upon 3 big boys fighting in the road. He stopped and inquired what they were fighting about, and one of them answered, "My lord, our father left us, when he died, a pair of boots, a key, and a cap. Whoever puts on the boots and wishes himself any place will find himself there. The key will open every door in the world, and with the cap on your head, no one can see you." Now our eldest brother wants to have all 3 for himself, and we wish to draw lots for them. "Oh, that is easily settled," said the youth. "I will throw this stone as far as I can, and the one who picks it up first shall have the 3 things." So he took the stone and flung it, and while the 3 brothers were running after it, he drew hastily on the boots and said, "Boots, take me to the place where I shall find my eldest sister." The next moment, the young man was standing on a steep mountain before the gates of a strong castle guarded by bolts and bars and iron chains. The key, which he had not forgotten to put in his pocket, opened the doors one by one, and he walked through a number of halls and corridors till he met a beautiful and richly dressed young lady who stared back in surprise at the sight of him and exclaimed, "Oh, sir, how did you contrive to get in here?" The young man replied that he was her brother, and told him by what means he had been able to pass through the doors. In return, she told him how happy she was, except for one thing, and that was her husband lay under a spell and could never break it till there should be put to death a man who could not die. They talked together for a long time, and then the lady said he had better leave her, as she was expected her husband back at any moment, and he might not like him to be there. But the young man assured her that she not be afraid, as he had with him a cap which would make him invisible. They were still deep in conversation when the door suddenly opened and a bird flew in. But he saw nothing unusual, for at first noise the youth had put on his cap. The young lady jumped up and brought up a large golden basin, in which the bird flew, reappearing directly as a handsome man. Turning to his wife, he cried, "I'm sure someone is in the room." She got frightened and declared that she was quite alone, but her husband persisted, and in the end she had to confess the truth. "But if he is really your brother, why did you hide him?" he asked. "I believe you are telling me a lie, and if he come back, I shall kill him." At this the youth took off the cap and came forward, and then the husband saw that he was indeed so like his wife that he doubted her word no longer and embraced his brother-in-law with delight. Drawing a feather from his bird's skin, he said, "If you are in danger and cry, 'Come and help me, King of Birds,' and everything will go well with you." The young man thanked him and went away, and after he had left the castle, he told the boots that they must take him to the place where his second sister was living. As before, he found himself at the gates of a huge castle, and with his second sister, very happily with her husband, who loved her dearly, but longing for a moment when he should be set free from the spell that kept him half his life a fish. When he arrived, and he had been introduced by his wife to her brother, he welcomed him warmly and gave him a fish scale, saying, "If you are ever in danger, call me. Come and help me, King of Fishes, and everything will go well with you." The young man thanked him and took his leave, and when he was outside the gates, he told the boots to take him to the place where his youngest sister lived. The boots carried him to a dark cavern, and with steps of iron leading up to it. Inside she sat, weeping and sobbing, as she had done nothing else the whole time she had been there. The poor girl had grown very thin. When she saw a man standing before her, she sprang to her feet and exclaimed, "Oh, whoever you are, save me and take me from this horrible place." Then he told her who he was, and how he had seen her sisters, whose happiness was spoiled by the spell under which both their husbands lay, and she in turn related her story. She had been carried off in the water meadow by a horrible monster who wanted to make her marry him by force, and had kept her prisoner all these years because she would not submit to his will. Every day he came to beg her to consent to his wishes, and to remind her that there was no hopes for her being set free, as he was the most constant man in the world, and besides that, he never could die. At these words, the youth remembered the two enchanted brother-in-laws, and he advised his sister, to promise to marry the old man if he would tell her why he could never die. Suddenly, everything began to tremble, as if it was shaken by a whirlwind, and the old man entered, and flinging himself at the feet of the girl, he said, "Are you still determined never to marry me? If so, you will have to sit there weeping till the end of the world, for I shall always be faithful to my wish to marry you." "Well, I will marry you," she said, "if you tell me why it is that you can never die." Then the old man burst into peals of laughter. You were thinking how you could be able to kill me. Well, to that, you would have to find an iron cask which lies in the bottom of the sea. and has a little dove inside. And then you would have to find an egg which the dove laid and bring it here and dash it against my head." And he laughed again in certainty that no one would ever got down to the bottom of the sea, and that if they did, they would never find the casket or be able to open it. When he could speak once more, he said, "Now you will be obliged to marry me, as you know my secret." But she begged so hard that the wedding might be put off for 3 days, that he conceded and went away rejoicing at his victory. When he had disappeared, the brother took off the cap, which had kept him invisible all this time, and told his sister not to lose heart, as he hoped in 3 days she would be free. Then he drew on his boots and wished himself at the seashore, and there he was directly. Drawing out the fish scale, he cried, "Come and help me, king of fishes." And his brother-in-law swam up and asked what he could do. The young man related the story, and when he was finished, his listener summoned all the fishes to his presence. The last to arrive was a little sardine who apologized for being late, but said that she had hurt herself by knocking her head against an iron cask that lay at the bottom of the sea. The king ordered several of the largest and strongest of his subjects to take the little sardine as a guide and bring him to the iron casket. They soon returned with the box placed across their backs and laid it down before him. Then the youth produced the key and said, "Key, open it." And the key opened it. And though they were all crowded around, ready to catch it, the white dove within it flew away. It was useless to go after it, and for a moment the young man's heart sank. The next minute, however, he remembered that he still had his feather and drew it out, crying, "Come to me, king of birds." And a rushing noise was heard, and the king of birds perched on his shoulder and asked what he could do for him. His brother-in-law told him the whole story, and when he had finished, the king of birds commanded all his subjects to hasten to his presence. In an instant, the air was dark with birds of all sizes, and at the very last came the white dove, apologizing for being so late by saying an old friend had arrived at his nest, and he had been obliged to give him some dinner. The king of birds ordered some of them to show the young man the white dove's nest. And when they reached it, there lay the egg, which was to break the spell and set them all free. When it was safely in his pocket, he told the boots to carry him straight to the cavern where his youngest sister sat awaiting him. Now, it was already far on into the 3rd day, which the old man had fixed for the wedding, and when the youth arrived, when the youth reached the cavern with his cap on his head, he found the monster there, urging the girl to keep her word and to let the marriage take place at once. At a sign from her brother, she sat down and invited the monster to lay his head on her lap. He did so with delight, and her brother, standing behind her back, passed her the egg unseen. She took it and dashed it straight at the horrible head, and the monster started with a groan that people took for the rumblings of an earthquake. He turned over and died. As the breath went out of his body, the husbands of the 2 eldest daughters resumed their proper shape, and sending for their mother-in-law, whose sorrow was so unexpectedly turned into joy, they had a great feast, and the youngest sister was rich to the end of her days with treasures she found in the cave, collected by the monster. From the Portuguese. The end. Oh, that turned out pretty good. All right, I think we have time for one more. And this one is called The Story of Bin Sadatu. There was once a king and a queen who had 3 wonderfully beautiful daughters. And their one thought, from morning till night, was how they could make the girls happy. One day, the princesses said to the king, "Dear father, we want so much to have a picnic and eat our dinner in the country." "Very well, dear children, let us have a picnic by all means," answered he, and gave orders that everything should be got ready. When luncheon was prepared, it was put into a cart, and the royal family stepped into a carriage and drove right away into the country. After a few miles, they reached a house and a garden belonging to the king, and close by was their favorite place to lunch. The drive had made them very hungry, and they ate with a hearty appetite till almost all the food had disappeared. When they had quite done, they said to their parents, "Now we should like to wander about the garden a little, but when we want to go home, just call us." And they ran off laughing down a green glide which led them to the garden. But no sooner had they stepped across the fence than a dark cloud came down and covered them, and prevented them from seeing whither they were going. Meanwhile, the king and queen sat lazily among the heather, and an hour or two slipped away. The sun was dropping towards the horizon, and they began to think it was time to go home. So they called to their daughters and called again, but no one answered them. Frightened at this silence, they searched every corner of the garden, the house, and the neighboring wood, but no trace of the girls was to be found anywhere. The earth seemed to have swallowed them up. The poor parents were desperate, and in despair, the queen wept all the way home, and for many days after, and the king issued a proclamation that whoever should bring back his lost daughters should have one of them to wife, and should, after his death, reign in his stead. Now 2 young generals were at the time living at the court, and when they heard the king's declaration, they said to one another, "Let us go out in search of them. Perhaps we shall be the lucky persons." And they set out, each mounted on a strong horse, taking with them a change of raiment and some money. But though they inquired at every village they rode through, they could hear nothing of the princesses, and by their money was all spent, and they were forced to sell their horses or give up the search. Even this money only lasted a little while longer, and nothing but their clothes lay between them and starvation. They sold the spare garments that they bound on their saddles, and went into coats that they stood up in the inn and begged for some food, as they were really starving. When, however, they had to pay for what they had eaten and drank, they said to the host, "We have no money, and not be the clothes we stand up in. Take these, and give us instead some old rags, and let us stay here and serve you." And the innkeeper was content with the bargain, and the generals remained, and were his servants. All this time, the king and queen remained in their palace hungering for their children, but not a word was heard of either of them or the generals who had gone to seek them. Now there was living in the palace a faithful servant of the king called Bin Sadatu, who had served him for many years. And when Bin Sadatu saw how grieved the king was. He lifted up his voice and said to him, "Your Majesty, let me go and seek your daughters." "No, no, Bensurdatu," replied the king. "3 daughters have I lost, and 2 generals, and shall I lose you also?" But Bensurdatu said again, "Let me now go, your Majesty. Trust me, I will bring your daughters back." Then the king gave way, and Bensurdatu set forth, and rode on till he came to the inn, where he dismounted and asked for food. It was bought by the 2 generals, whom he knew at once in spite of their miserable clothes, and much astonished, asked them how in the world they came here. They told him all of their adventures, and he sent for the innkeeper and said to him, "Give them back their garments, and I will pay everything that they owe you." And the innkeeper did as he was bid, and when the 2 generals were dressed in their proper clothes, they declared that they would join Bensurdatu, and that they would seek for the king's daughters. The 3 companions rode on for many miles, and at length they came to a wild place, without sign of a human being. It was getting dark, and fearing to be lost to this desolate spot, they pushed on their horses, and at last saw a light in the window of a tiny hut. "Who comes there?" asked a voice, and they knocked at the door. "Oh, have pity on us, and give us a night's shelter," replied Bensurdatu. "We are 3 tired travelers who have lost our way." Then the door was opened by a very old woman who stood back and beckoned them to enter. "Whence do you come, and whither do you go?" she said. "Oh, good woman, we have a heavy task before us," answered Bensurdatu. "We are bound to carry the king's daughters back to the palace." "Oh, unhappy creatures," she cried, "you know not what you are doing. The king's daughters were covered by a thick cloud, and no one knows where they may be." "Oh, tell us if you know, my good woman," entreated Bensurdatu, "for with them lies all of our happiness." "Even if I were to tell you," answered she, "you could not rescue them. To do so, or to do that, you would have to go to the very bottom of a deep river, and though certainly you would find the king's daughters there, yet the 2 eldest are guarded by 2 giants, and the youngest is watched by the serpent with 7 heads." The 2 generals who stood by listening were filled with terror at her words, and wished to return immediately. But Bensurdatu stood firm and said, "Now we have got so far, we must carry the thing through. Tell us where the river is, so that we may get there as soon as possible." And the woman told them, and gave them some cheese, wine, and bread, so that they should not set forth starving. And when they had eaten and drunk, they laid themselves down to sleep. The sun had only just risen above the hills the next morning, before they all woke, and taking leave of the wise woman who had helped them, they rode on till they came to the river. "I am the eldest," said one of the generals, "and it is my right to go down first." So the others fastened a cord around him, and gave him a little bell, and let him go down into the water. But scarcely had the river closed above his head with such a dreadful rushing sound, and pearls of thunder came crashing around about him, that he lost all of his courage, and rang his bell, if perchance it might be heard amidst all this clamor. Great was his relief when the rope began to slowly pull him upwards. Then the other general plunged in, but he fared no better than the first, and was soon on dry ground again. "Well, you are a brave pair," said Bensurdatu, and he tied the rope around his own waist. "Let us see what will happen to me." And when he heard the thunder and clamor round about him, he thought to himself, "Oh, make as much noise as you like, it won't hurt me." When his feet touched the bottom, he found himself in a large, brilliantly lighted hall, and in the middle sat the eldest princess, and in front of her lay a huge giant fast asleep. Directly she saw Bensurdatu, she nodded at him, and asked with her eyes, how had he come down there? For answer he drew his sword, and was about to cut off the giant's head, when she stopped him quickly, and made signs to hide himself, as the giant was beginning to wake. "I smell the flesh of a man," murmured he, stretching his great arms. "Why, how in the world could any man get down here?" replied she. "You had better go to sleep again." So he turned over and went to sleep, and then the princess signed to Bensurdatu, who drew his sword and cut off the giant's head with such a blow that it fell into the corner. And the heart of the princess leapt within her, and she placed a golden crown on the head of Bensurdatu, and called him her deliverer. "Now, show me where your sisters are," he said, "and I may free them also." So the princess opened the door, and led him into another hall, wherein sat her next sister, guarded by a giant who was fast asleep. When the second princess saw him, she made a sign to them to hide themselves, for the giant was showing symptoms of waking. "I smell man's flesh," murmured he sleepily. "Now, how could any man get down here?" asked she. "Go to sleep again." And as soon as he closed his eyes, Bensurdatu stole out from his corner, and struck such a blow at the head that it flew far, far away. And the princess could not find words to thank Bensurdatu for what he had done, and she too placed in his hand a golden crown. "Now show me where your youngest sister is," said he, "that I may free her also." "Ah, that I fear you will never be able to do," sighed they, "for she is in the power of a serpent with 7 heads." "Take me to him," replied Bensurdatu. It will be a splendid fight." Excuse me. Then the princess opened a door, and Bensurdatu passed through, and found himself in a hall that was even larger than the other 2. And there stood the youngest sister, chained fast to the wall. Before her was stretched a serpent with 7 heads, horrible to see. As Bensurdatu came forward, it twisted all its 7 heads in his direction, and then made a quick dart to snatch him within its grasp. But Bensurdatu drew his sword, and laid about him, till the 7 heads were rolling on the floor. Flinging down his sword, he rushed to the princess and broke her chains, and she wept for joy and embraced him, and took the golden crown from off her head and placed it in his hand. "Now we must go back to the upper world," said Bensurdatu, and led her to the bottom of the river. The other princesses were waiting there, and he tied the rope round the eldest and rung his bell. And the generals above heard and drew her gently up. They then unfastened the cord and threw it back into the river, and in a few moments The second princess stood beside her sister. So now there was only Bensurdatu and the youngest princess. "Dear Bensurdatu," she said, "do me a kindness and let me draw you up before me. I dread the treachery of the generals." "No, no," replied Bensurdatu. "I certainly will not leave you down here. There is nothing to fear from my comrades." "If it is your wish, I shall go up then. But first I swear that if you do not follow to marry me, I shall stay single for the rest of my days." Then he bound the rope around her, and the generals drew her up. But instead of lowering the rope again into the river, envy at the courage and success of Bensurdatu so filled the hearts of the two generals that they turned away and left him to perish. And more than that, they threatened the princesses and forced them to promise to tell their parents that it was the two generals who had set them free. And if they should ask you about Bensurdatu, you must say that you have never seen him, they added. And the princesses, fearing for their lives, promised everything, and they rode back to the court together. The king and queen were beside themselves with joy when they saw their dear children once more. But when the generals had told their story and the dangers that they had run, the king declared that they had gained their reward, and the two elder sisters should become their wives. And now we must see where poor Bensurdatu was doing. He waited patiently a long, long time, but when the rope never came back, he knew he had been right, and that his comrades had betrayed him. "Ah, now I shall never reach the world again," murmured he. But being a brave man, and knowing that mourning his fate would profit him nothing, he rose and began to search through the 3 halls, where perhaps he might find something to help him. In the last one stood a dish covered with food, which reminded him that he was hungry, and he sat down and ate and drank. Months passed away when one morning, as he was walking through the halls, he noticed a purse hanging on the wall, which had never been there before. He took it down to examine it, and nearly let it fall with surprise when a voice came from the purse saying, "What commands have you?" "Oh, take me out of this horrible place and up into the world again." And in a moment, he was standing by the river bank with the purse tightly grasped in his hands. "Now, let me have the most beautiful ship that ever was built, all manned and ready for sea." And there was the ship, with the flag floating from its mast on which were the words, "King with the 3 crowns." Then Bensurdatu climbed on board and sailed away to the city where the princesses dwelt, and when he reached the harbor, he blew trumpets and beat drums so that everyone ran to the doors and windows. And the king heard too, and saw the beautiful vessel and said to himself, "That must indeed be a mighty monarch, for he has 3 crowns, which I have only 1. So he hastened to greet the stranger and invited him to his castle, for thought he, "This will be a fine husband for my youngest daughter." Now, the youngest princess, who had never married, and who had turned a deaf ear to all her wooers. Such a long time had passed since Bensurdatu had left the palace that the king never guessed for a moment that the splendid-clad stranger before him was the man whom he had so deeply mourned as dead. "Noble lord," said he, "let us feast and make merry together, and then, if it seem good to you, do me the honor to take my youngest daughter to wife." And Bensurdatu was glad, and they all sat down to a great feast, and there with great rejoicing. But only the youngest daughter was sad, for her thoughts were with Bensurdatu. After they arose from the table, the king said to her, "Dear child, this mighty lord does you the honor to ask your hand in marriage." "Oh, father," answered she, Spare me, I pray, for I desire to remain single." Then Bensurdatu turned to her and said, "And if I were Bensurdatu, would you give the same answer to me?" And as she stood silently gazing at him, he added, "Yes, I am Bensurdatu, and this is my story." The king and queen had their hearts stirred within them as the tale of his adventures. And when he had ended, the king stretched out his hand and said, "Dear Bensurdatu, my youngest daughter shall indeed be your wife, and when I die, my crown shall be yours. As for the men who have betrayed you, they shall leave the country, and you shall see them no more." And the wedding feast was ordered, and rejoicing was held for 3 days over the marriage of Bensurdatu and the youngest princess. And this is from Sicily. Oh, what a nice tale. Let's see. We're at the 2-hour mark. That's a good reading installment. So let's bookmark our location here so we can come back for our next reading next week. And I hope that you all enjoyed those stories, and then I hope that it is relaxing to listen to, and that it is just a temporary way to help your mind escape to something fun. But for now, happy Friday. Have a wonderful weekend, whatever it is that you plan on getting into. And we will see everyone back here in Somnium on Monday for Mahjong. And next week we'll have our reading on Wednesday again. And Friday we'll either do Spirit Tea, or we'll pick up with Minds Beneath Us. And Saturday or Sunday, I may have a random stream. Nothing in particular in mind. Just to have an extra day added into our schedule. But yeah, that's all for now. Let's do our outro messages. Ayasumira. And sweet dreams. And I bid you adieu, my dear dreamers. Good night.